I believe it is technically in agriculture, but other behavior wise, you can put them potatoes or jojos or microbuses or etc. However, you will feel atmosphere, reckless driving, customized vehicles, etc. But find the good, so sometimes they're good bodas, some cities call them moto taxis, radas, etc. However, they have the same function. It's door-to-door transportation, so it's a bit personalized. And then also you either those for doors that are available also in a lot of cities in the country. In Asia, for example, not so much in Europe, but they are making a huge impact in the informal sector in Africa. Going to the last point, finally speaking, the social and gender issues. Mainly a lot of social and gender issues are happening in the field of mobility, not only in mobility, but other things. First of all, as I said initially, the presentation is the culture and social norms and how people sees it not acceptable for example, for females to ride bike or to ride motorcycles, or actually or to ride public transport, or etc. There are a lot of culture and social norms, and we will be discussing this further, I believe. There's also a lot of economic constraints, because in most places in the continent, the household for the income from itself, or at least is responsible for how they will spend. The woman in the family works more than the man, but she also constraints that maybe sometimes she cannot afford to get a bike or to go by public transport, etc. The safety and security, of course, it is really an issue in terms of physical safety, in terms of harassment, and of mental safety, that of a lot of issues that and poverty as well is an issue, because women are mainly sometimes involved in raising children, a lot of household activities. Last thing, general issue of social and gender is the limited female representation, generally in the governments, but specifically in the urban mobility field. So these are very general challenges and very general introduction about the topics that we'll be talking about in this panel. So now I'll be glad to move to the next presentation for Dr. Hani Agazi and Dr. Amras, who is not here today, so will not be joining us. So Dr. Hani Agazi will be here. He will be discussing the equitable and sustainable mobility, forming sustainable transitions in the discourse context itself. So he'll be mainly talking about the gender sustainability planning, or etc. Then we have afterwards the micro-mobility. Transportation, etc. We have also Casio from Mozambique. We're also tackling the in cities, or solar mobility issue, discussing the flyovers, which we're tackling, let's say also the future of cities, how actually the passion of cities now are actually going to car-dependent development. Flyover, this is what solar will be presenting. It will be following with the general challenges, and then maybe now to join us for e-mobility. This is so very limited, it's not everything, but basically, again, for your kind inviting, I'm really looking forward to the rest of the presentations and the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Yes, yes, we can. Yeah, it's from my side, yeah. I'll try to make one more. So, the card now is still at the moment in the slash place. Outside the frame, set the camera to control box. My courses, there is no transfer information.
government that are responsible for the emission road and also conflict with local authorities in some areas, and we cannot really find any consistent piece of information that you can use to plan or to even to discuss any potential projects. From this came the idea of Transport for Cairo. In general, we started digitizing Cairo's public transport because Cairo is the the capital. It's the most diverse city in terms of the transportation networks. We started to collect data on public and start some sort of evidence-based policy making and planning. Using this data set that's available, if you want to check it, we can conduct several kinds of analyses. From corridor mapping, like here for Cairo's ring road, which we measured the passenger flow on a targeted section, to a city level planning. This is the 6th of October City SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, and 6th of October is a 1 billion inhabitant city, or basically a satellite city around Cairo. And we started to look at the city or the population of the transport from a perspective of number of trips and the distribution of trips over different modes for people to access the opportunities. And then we started projecting based on the origin destination data and network data we collected. We started the growth on travel demand over different geographical scales. So we have intra-city trips, we have intercity trips, and we have metropolitan trips. Then we started projecting the modal share differences on different geographic scale over 3 scenarios, and based on the proxy emissions for different modes, we managed to calculate the growth rate of greenhouse gases emissions over the course of 10 years. So as you can see, do nothing scenario, if we do nothing about the transportation right now and leave it to grow on a linear fashion, we'll end up with 75 increase of greenhouse gases in 10 years. If only the planned big metropolitan level infrastructures like monorail and BRT are implemented, we can have only 21% increase in greenhouse gases in 10 years, while if we complement it with city level interventions like bike lanes, improved city bus services, etc., we managed to make it like only 7% increase against 100% increase of population. We use the data to create accessibility analysis on metropolitan level. Like for example, if you want to see how people can access accessibility score varies across the geography. We try to innovate. We try to, because of the data scarcity, we don't have any formal data. We try to innovate, to collect data from different sources and use it for calculation and analysis. For example, we collected opportunities or job opportunities data from Fowry data from Yellow Pages. Yellow Pages is a website with loads of information about jobs and other things. Shamsiya, which is a database for hospitals with the number of beds and number of employees, and Google Maps, Google Places. And I started to use public transport data to measure the accessible numbers for different areas across the city using public transport for 1 hour. And we ended up with this map that shows the job accessibility score, and based on that we can see the differences or the increase or decrease in accessibility by introducing any new infrastructure, and how sensitive the accessibility score will be different for different areas. But at the end of the day, to try to mitigate the effects of data scarcity, the lack of data, lack of sustainable data provision for decision making. So take a look at the sustainable mobility interventions that took place in Egypt in general. We find that we often overlook the interdependence and conflict between different modes. Projects often focus on a single mode, like for example cycling, or a specific service like a BRT over the ring road, or etc. They often lack perspective of the relationship between different modes, and that people often use different modes in their trips, which is super intermodal, super multimodal nature of the city. So you end up with suboptimal results, like what can see here. This is the Sustainable Transport Project from a consortium of Ministry of Local Governments, UNDP, and other entities. And this is in Shibirkom, a secondary city in Egypt. This is right after they established the bike lanes. Unfortunately, they didn't consider the car parking, street parking, which is prevalent, and the bike lane wasn't really protected. So the project failed miserably from the first day. And also we have another problem, which is lack of ownership from local governments. Often projects from international organizations and central government are thrown into on the shoulders of the local authority without building ownership on a local level. And this severely affects the sustainability of the project, whether in terms of management or in terms of finances, because the capital cost is there to start the project, but you need further investments to keep it running. We have another problem, which is cities off the map. So most data are collected for Cairo, some of the data are collected for Alexandria, but this is, for example, this is Asyut. This is a photo taken by Tabdil. It shows the amount of bicycles that's parking in front of the school and the demand, the need for infrastructure. People are cycling anyways, but if you take a look at the streets of Asyut, there is nowhere for anybody to cycle safely. Yet people are cycling. So the potential is there to just provide the infrastructure where people actually cycle. And this is how you can score some quick wins and learn valuable lessons to take this experiments and generalize it over different areas in the country. It has lots of cities with more than 100 million or 1 million inhabitants. But the problem is we don't have necessary data to even identify the most suitable or the likely successful interventions. So our recommendations moving forward to be able to curb the data scarcity problem is, first of all, digitalization of existing workflows. Instead of collecting data in the stations using papers just to figure out the licensing fees and etc., we can use digital tools to just digitize the headway, the operational transport data, and make it available for decision and planning. Very simple. It only needs to change from paper to digital tools, free open source digital tools. Easier to collect data points that are often very resource intensive, specific fee visits or specific. Second thing is we need to move from mode and core specific thinking to urban agglomeration thinking. We need to collect about a city, about a metropolitan area, across all different types and needs of, to be able to have knowledge about the whole system rather than pieces of the geography or pieces of the network. Also, and this is for even data, collecting data for specific level sustainable knowledge repositories that include data on different aspects, socioeconomic data, network data, travel demand data, and can be maintained and attracted as a making of evidence-based decision making. We want to move from data to measure the feasibility of a specific project to data to be there for any project to assess and identify this. Finally, to build decentralized capacities for data collection management and decision making in local governments, because on capacity, technical capacity and financial capacity in local governments, the investments in sustainable mobility will remain centralized because the national government in Cairo will keep working better than local governments, we will end up with problems in other cities that are in terms of the internal migration. So we need to create some sort of geographically decentralized approach of investment in governance capacity. Thank you very much. If I surpass my time, I think I passed my time. Sorry about that.
So thank you for the presentation. I totally agree with what you said. The future of sustainability, it is a question, and it is unfortunately like Cairo and Egypt generally seems to not be moving towards the right direction. Hopefully we'll be there one day. So now we can proceed with our next presentation, also regarding miniaturized transport, focusing on rapid mobility service. It is the first electric, it's the first public electric and bikes in Egypt. So now I can hand the presentation to Kamal. Kamal, we're very happy to have you, and please, you may start. There are some reports about the sound is a bit low. If possible, please voice as much as you can. I believe you were a bit sick, so yeah, as much as you can would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to walk you through our story at Rabbit and what will believe the adoption of such solution in Egypt. Let me know if you can.
Yeah, it is visible. Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. All right. So, 2019, when micromobility was a term no one in Egypt is familiar with, and honestly, as a model, we were very worried whether to work in Egypt or not because of the different factors, such as infrastructure, such as affordability, and such as culture and media, which is a big in markets such as Egypt, especially that when we started working on Rabbit, we did our first focus group and to understand why aren't Egyptians using or cycling to work every day, and the mindset and the perception was basically e-scooters or bikes and scooters could be used for leisure or fitness, but definitely not for work, mainly because of the weather element in Egypt, because the weather is more humid than Europe, for example. So basically, if you go and cycle for 2-3 kilometers to get to work, you get there sweaty, it's not comfortable, it's not convenient. And that's when we started working on why don't we use an electric vehicle, an e-scooter or an e-bike, and you remove the element of effort, and this makes life much easier, and this makes e-scooters and e-bikes an option for transportation. So the problem started basically is traffic. We're all struggling with transportation on a daily basis, and there is a dire need for micromobility solutions. And based on numbers from the Ministry of Transport, there is 12% of the potential earnings of Egyptians are lost because they are stuck in traffic, because of the high number of cars on the street, of the limited parking spots that we have in Egypt. And back in 2019, when we were still assessing the market, we spoke with the management of Uber and Careem, which are the biggest ride-hailing apps in Egypt, to understand some of the numbers in terms of rides. So Uber and Careem back then in 2019 were fulfilling almost 750,000 rides on a daily basis, mostly in Cairo and Giza, or Greater Cairo, as we call it. And to our surprise, 50% of these rides were for distances below 2 kilometers. So we had 375,000 rides that commuters are doing through a mobile app, paying by card, or a percentage of them paying by card, for distances below 2 kilometers, which is basically, that's our initial market, and these are the users who we can target initially. And when we started testing on ground and doing 2 and 3 kilometer rides, either by requesting a ride-hailing app or renting an e-scooter or e-bike, it was 24% cheaper taking an e-scooter or e-bike and 30% faster, because you don't have to waste time either waiting for an Uber or a Careem and getting stuck in traffic because based on the win back numbers, in peak hours in downtown Cairo, speeds go down to below 15 kilometers. So you can at a faster speed, or even if you're on a bike or a scooter, you're definitely faster. And we started in November 2020. We started again in February 2020. We launched in gated communities in Egypt at first because we were worried about the security of our assets, the safety of our users, and how will the government react once we leave our scooters and bikes in the streets of Cairo, because we operate in a dockless model. We don't have stations, so we can take the scooter or bike from anywhere, leave it anywhere within the geofence that we show on the app. So we started in 2020. Guess what? A week later, there is COVID. We had to stop our operations and then operate again in November 2020. So the way we thought about it, that we dedicated Q4 2020 and the entire year 2021 to build our operations arm, tech arm, and prepare to launch in areas such as downtown Cairo or the neighborhoods around downtown Cairo. And by June 2022, we started operating in the different public neighborhoods of Cairo, and we were already using e-scooters, and then in March 2022 we added e-bikes, and now we're working on adding e-Vespas as well. So in terms of operations, how it works, we have three different interfaces that we use. There's the user mobile app. Basically, users open the app and it shows, as shown here on the screen, where the vehicles are located, and then it shows you either if you're close to a vehicle, you just can click right now and it opens the camera to scan the QR code, or if you're far away, you just get that, you click on get directions, and then the app moves you to Google Maps to show you the walking route to get to the vehicle. And then in terms of the management dashboard, that's where us as a team, we track our vehicles, we track the performance of our vehicles, we track the number of signups, the urgent vehicles, and we do a lot of analysis through this dashboard. And finally, the Ops app is for the on-ground team who are handling the redistribution of the vehicles, collection of the vehicles, cleaning, maintenance, and everything regarding on-ground. So if I want to put the user app, as I mentioned, you find the vehicle first, and then you scan the QR code. And one of the key challenges for this model in Egypt was theft and vandalism. We always accounted for higher percentages of theft and vandalism when compared to Europe and the US. However, because of our tech and our local knowledge and town teams, we were able to limit the theft rate to below 3%, which is a great number, half the number that's in Europe and the US basically. And one of the things that's been very useful for us, that we added electric cable locks to all of our vehicles, and we requested that any user, in order to end the ride, they need to take a photo of the vehicle while it's locked, and when training an AI machine learning model with AWS, with Amazon Web Services, in order to validate whether this vehicle is properly locked or not, and if it's blocking any sidewalks or doorways basically. And this validation happens in a second or a couple of seconds, and then you get a bill that shows the number of minutes of the ride and the CO2 emissions saved by doing this ride instead of doing a car ride. In terms of the management dashboard, it shows the peak demand at the times and areas in order to move our vehicles when the demand is, and it directly matches the on-ground team on where the demand is and supplies in order to be able to redistribute, collect and charge vehicles, and identify any problems that we have in real time, and as well as looks at the customer behavior or the user behavior in terms of where does they stop their journey on the app, where do they continue journey on the app, the average drive time, and all of these different elements that we look at in order to make sure that we're really solving our users and we're really solving the problem for them. And in terms of the Ops app, as I mentioned, if any vehicle needs to be maintained, if repairs that is required, and where to distribute the vehicles, and where to find any issues with the vehicles. And basically our vehicles, they have the IoT device that does the tracking in terms of GPS and tracking in terms of behavior. We see the temperature of the batteries, we see the performance of the battery, and we have the cable lock that we control through the IoT device and our backend basically. So in 2022, we were able to operate and expand to 7 different cities in Egypt and around 18 neighborhoods, where in Cairo and Giza, we have the highest per in Egypt, and a very different demographic than, for example, Tanta and Mansoura, which are in the Delta region. And then we expanded to Alexandria as well on the north coast, roads and communities, and then Port Said in the Suez Canal region, and Sharm el-Sheikh in South Sinai. And we're still expanding. We're still expanding to other neighborhoods in Cairo and Giza, and other cities in the Suez region and in Upper Egypt as well. And we're also expanding internationally. We're on track to expand to another North African market within the next 3 months. And this will be our first international expansion. Again, markets in North Africa have very similar dynamics and very similar challenges. So it makes sense for us to do this move. And some key figures about us. So we're currently at 325,000 users on our app. We've been operating in 7 cities in Egypt. We've done more than 700,000 rides, and that's almost 1.6 million kilometers on our e-scooters and e-bikes, and that's on only 500 e-scooters and e-bikes that we have. And we've maintained the 3% theft rate since January 2022. And an interesting fact, in 2020 and 2021, we were only able to acquire 18,000 users. By January 2022, we only had 18,000 users on the app. And then 15 months later, up to 1st of June 2023, we grew from the 18,000 users to 320,000 users, and that's all organic, that's all word of mouth, and this is a great testament for us on how we're really solving a problem for our users. And the way we select our cities, we make sure that we're selecting cities with key pain points, and we look at markets and cities in terms of 3 different factors. First is inhabitants or population density. So we look at the inhabitants per kilometer square. For us, for example, Egypt is a great market, Morocco is a great market, South Korea, France, Turkey, all of these markets are great for us. When you compare it to, for example, the GCC, they don't have these population densities, they don't have the same congestion levels as ours in Egypt or in Morocco or in different markets, and they have severe weather, which makes the market doesn't make any sense for users at least 6 months of the year to take an e-scooter or an e-bike to move around because of the severe weather they have, unlike us in North Africa and other African markets. And the other thing that we've worked on heavily
interested on different the difference in consumer behavior or basically difference of travel pattern between rabbit users in Tanta and Mansoura from Cairo and Alexandria. Specific geographical, even statistical differences in the patterns of the use?
Thank you, Alan, for your comment and for your question. Honestly, the photo that you had in your presentation about the bikes part or rack in the school, that was for me an eye opener. Really happy with that. And I didn't know that Asyut is considered as a capital of cycling. I always thought that definitely there are cycling happening in Upper Egypt. In Suhail also has bike lanes, which is another city in Upper Egypt. But still, when compared to the number of rides done by cars, it's still so far off when you look at other markets such as Europe, for example. So yeah, I fully agree with you. In terms of in different cities, definitely the pattern changes. So, for example, Mansoura, we have a lot of rides happening in Mansoura at the time between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., which typically is a very low time in terms of utilization of the fleet in Cairo and Giza. And when we started to understand the pattern more, why is this happening, we found out that there's a very low number of taxis roaming around in the streets of Mansoura at this time of the day. And there's a lot of people in Mansoura in the area where we're operating, which is around the university campus. They want to go to the campus and they can't find any taxis or Ubers at this time of the day. And typically they're helicopters, so they need to be at the university as quick as possible. It's a very interesting to see that actually others in different age groups are riding our scooters because it's the only mobility solution at this time of the day in the city. So that was a case, for example, in Mansoura. Another case was in Zambia, for example, that a lot of our users are actually car owners, but they don't want to move their car because they rarely find a parking spot near their home. So once they find a parking spot, then they're good, and if they can do their commute or trip using one of our scooters, then it's fine. It's a short distance commute, they leave their car, take a scooter. If it's a long distance commute, then they'll have to move their car. But the motive was for riding with us is do not move my car, I don't want to leave the parking spot, I'll stay in the parking spot and take any other option that's available. So that was another interesting in Zambia. Yeah, I think these are two examples that I hope it's answering your question.
Thank you so much for your question and contribution, Abdurrahman, and for your response. So now I'm inviting the audience. Is anybody having any other questions? I said I have many, maybe we can proceed, but yeah, any other questions from the audience? Yeah, so maybe we can give one question to Abdurrahman from my side before we proceed. So now, Abdurrahman, really, yeah, I have a question. I don't want to consider it political. I want to play far from the politics because we're both from the same country and yeah, we know what's happening. So I believe we can all agree that we have a lot of problems if we are talking about mobility in terms of Egypt. And one of the main problems that we are featuring, as you said, was the data scarcity. This is mainly the huge problem. As for us, I believe the three of us, Kamal, Abdurrahman, and myself, we are three mobility experts focused in Egypt. But we every now and then we get surprised that there's a lot of data that we do not know because it's not actually published. There's no open source of data and etc. And without data, you cannot do any projects or you cannot actually take it further. So then the problem is left as is, or maybe someone find a business model or a business development and then just invest in it and then it pops out. So a lot of projects in Egypt, I feel that it gets actually popped out by this way. It's not a problem-based solution, but it's just an opportunity to invest or to have a successful business model. Do you think that actually digitalizing the public transport or actually working on the field of data would be one of the main pillars that will push the sustainable mobility in Egypt forward, or is it mainly a cultural thing as well? Because as Kamal mentioned in his presentation, or in his discussion, that is Egypt or is Cairo a cycling city? And then I wonder, is it even a driving city? Is it nice to drive in Egypt? Is it nice to walk in Cairo, or even to cycle, or etc.? And we even cannot track, is there a lot of people that are actually depending on cyclists or no, cycling or no? Because I can actually, sometimes you can observe it. Even specifically if we are talking about downtown Cairo that had very limited car infrastructure, if we may say, so a lot of even specifically shops used to do most of their deliveries using bicycles, even if they're not cargo bikes, it's just normal bikes. Even if they're talking about electrical supplies or even something that are mainly a bit heavy, then they tend to use also cargo bikes, and as well as the vegetables and the fruits cars and etc. So back to my question: do you think it's mainly a cultural problem, or is it a data scarcity problem, or is it mainly a political thing? It's not the main aim that we want to reach within our government, because there's a very interesting question that I have, is what actually inspires mobility planners? Why are they now planning towards the car dependency in our cities? So is it mainly something related to the capacity building for our mobility planners, or data scarcity, or you would say that mainly it's a cultural problem for the people itself? Or any other fourth answer?
Oh, this is a multi-layered question. I'll try to answer it to the best of my abilities, because as I said, we knowledge scarcity that's translated into data scarcity, but it's also a knowledge scarcity. From what I see, it's not like the behavioral aspect is at the bottom of the list. Why? Because we have a culture of public transport in Egypt. You can see the modal share now, like 63% of the trips are made by public transport, and 73% of those trips made by informal transport. So in terms of the modal share, even the car ownership rates in Cairo are 14%. 14%, only 14% of the population have access to private cars. Of the house or the households, maybe you have 2-3 cars in the same households, but 14% of the households have access to private cars. So generally speaking, people in Egypt are using public transport and active mobility. The problem is lack of data is a problem, but it's not the mobility problem. It's the decision-making problem. If you're trying to move towards evidence-based, resource-efficient, which means you know which project will yield the best outcomes because you have limited financial resources, then you need data. Other than that, you'll end up with the powerhouses or the powerful guys, powerful entities attracting all the funds, like in Cairo, for example. Cairo is attracting all the funds, and the underinvestment in other cities, it's because Cairo is the central, the capital of Egypt. The central government is there. All of the metro lines were built there. You have the metro line of Mansoura. It was planned in 2003, and until now they haven't started it. And Mansoura needs a metro line system. Even the one the feasibility, it qualifies for a metro line. Yet you have you don't have enough data to negotiate the priorities. So when I speak about data scarcity, I speak about it from a decision-making perspective. I don't think that we are there yet to discuss, like, for example, electronic payments or using data by the public for information. This is really important, but for now, we need to focus on decision-making, on how to set our priorities based on specific objectives. For me, for example, I focus more on equality and accessibility. For other people, it might be greenhouse gas emissions overall. But you need at least to start collecting essential data, and this can be as simple as including the origin destination data in the census survey. This is super easy. This is industry practice or industry standard in census data collection across different countries in the south and the north. You can digitalize the record keeping of the stations, because they keep the record. Even for informal transport, you have a master who's taken notes about when a specific vehicle moved from out of the terminal. This is because they need that to be able to calculate the licensing fees at the end of the month. The problem is all those records are not kept in a specific database accessible by transport planners and by governmental officials. So I think the data scarcity issue, it's a problem that hinders our way forward, but I cannot say this is the problem of our transportation in Egypt. Is first of all urban expansion, building cities in the desert, increase the demand at the beginning, and then focus on motorization and routes rather than public transport things. And finally, it's street space usage. It's basically how we assign spaces for different users in the streets. We're taking space from pedestrians for cars. If you do that, you end up with lots of people trying to buy cars and a horrendous experience for cyclists. We can see cyclists and pedestrians. We can see that in Europe. So yeah, the problems are non-tech are like the data is not a problem. It's a part of the solution. And hopefully also we can find some sort of local management and governance capacity being built up, because you need competent governance to interact with competent experts. Another main problem is you don't have the technical capacity essential in the government to communicate with a bunch of international consultants, international organizations, to be able to arrive at the possible outcome for a city or for a specific project. And this also needs to be in mind.
Yeah. Okay, for the elaborative discussion, if I may say, for me it's a very, and I believe it's not only related to Cairo or in Egypt only. I believe this would be a very common issue in several African. Yeah, this is the mentioning implementation. Sometimes it's related to corruption. Sometimes it's to capacity of the most problem. So unfortunately, Philip, you just sent a question now in the chat. It was directed to Kamal from Rabbit, but unfortunately he had to take off now because he has another appointment. But I believe very discussion actually keep it going for hours, but now unfortunately we need to come to the next presentation to Classio. But please, you can just get in touch with us, Abdurrahman, myself, and Kamal to answer any of your questions. You can reach out by emails, by LinkedIn, or etc. Our LinkedIn names are the same as written here in the presentation, and we will be looking forward to receiving your question. And if there's some time left, maybe we can integrate this question in the next discussion panel. So now I would ask Classio if he's hearing me right now to start sharing his screen in order to move. Apologies for any delays, Classio. We had some technical issues at first, so we started a bit late, and then the discussion was interesting, so we kept it going. So can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know if you also can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you, and we can now see your presentation, but it's not in full screen mode, so if possible, just make it a full screen, and then you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Jose, for inviting me, Hassan, and other colleagues, and it's a pleasure being here. Today I'm going to give you a brief presentation about one of our paper which was published recently, which we tried to compare factors influencing cycling in sub-Saharan African cities, and we tried to compare with developed world cities and to see which factors have similar influence or which factors has different influence on cycling in both contexts. So this is the table of contents. First of all, I'm going to present you the introduction, the research gap, and the research objectives, followed by research methodology. And after this, I'm going to share the results. And the results are going to be divided in 4 main blocks. The first one, we're trying to compare the influence of socioeconomic factors in cycling in both sub-Saharan African cities and developed world cities. followed by built environment factors, weather condition and environmental factors, but also attitudinal factors. The last part is mostly on the conclusions. Just to start, I have to say that cycling is a very important mode in African cities. To speak of that, the cycling share, especially in large African cities, still very low. Here I bring you this graph which shows the cycling share in African cities, especially if you look for Maputo, which is the capital of Mozambique. Cycling is almost less than 2%. It shows that the proportion of people cycling in these cities is very, very low. And also this similar with for other cities like Windhoek, Abidjan, they also have very low cycling share. And yes, the proof of that, there are still some initiatives to increase cycling in these cities. However, from the literature, we found that most of these initiatives are imported for let's say Western cities, for Europe, for US, and it happens so that these policies or these initiatives cannot fit within the African context. We bring here two examples, for instance, for this one, for this author here, just to say that to promote cycling in Ghana, in Tamale in Ghana, they say that they consider expansion of routes by removing street trading activities. The other author in Mali and Burkina Faso, they also say that cycling is crucial to be complementary to public transport, particularly for short trips. However, what we found is that those approaches are not very applicable in African context, because we found that, for instance, for the first approach, they went to remove street vending in order to promote cycling infrastructure. We feel that they may exclude the local culture habits, as people often shop local market for their daily living. Therefore, including a local market in the cycling route is essential, first of all, to tightening community bonds, but also this could also increase or could influence cycling behavior. For the other, we say that they don't consider the lack of where people in African city, they use bicycles even for long distances. Not only bicycles, but also even for individual riders, they also cycle for very long distance. So considering cycling to be used for the last mile connection probably is not be a proper approach, because cycling in African city is also used for very long distance, especially for those guys who use bicycle taxi. So, I say that the aim of this study is mostly to explore the existing literature and to see how the different factors like economic factors, built environment factors, weather conditions, but also attitudinal factor might influence cycling in African cities and try to compare with developed world cities. So this will help us to define or even to identify those factors that we should pay a lot of attention to, should try to see the local characteristics, not try to import initiatives from other contexts, because those factors might have very influence on cycling in the African context. Before doing that, we conducted a survey, which was mostly in the Web of Science, Scopus, and so on. We ended up gathering around 61 papers. This after a lot of after filtering using several criteria. But we also used some searching terms. We also used the first viewers in order to see the relevance of this searching term, but also to see how these searching terms are connected between each other. So those searching terms that they showed to have very low relevance, so they were discarded. So therefore, were replaced by other searching terms, it to allow having papers that can cover or that cover mostly the searching term that papers that include the searching term that we were considering in this study. Well, when you sorted the results, we found that mostly for the socioeconomic factors like age, gender, income, education level, household composition, employment status, but also vehicle ownership, all those factors, after exploring different literature, found that they have different influence on cycling in both African cities as well as in the developed world cities. Here I want first to highlight income. We say that most of the references say, most of the literature say that income as, let's say, as insignificant influence on cycling in developed world cities. But well, in African cities, income has very strong influence. As one of the panelists says here, cycling income is mostly for poor people. So therefore, income has very different influence on both contexts. If we move to the built environment factors, we have here pavement quality, street lighting, traffic volume and speed, street signals, road encroachment, and travel distance. We find that most of these factors have different influence on. Especially here, we have to highlight that street lighting has similar influence on cycling in both contexts, which means that for paper we searched it, they found out that, well, it's in both contexts, either in sub-Saharan African cities as well as developed world cities, they consider they choose routes which have street lights. So this is similar in both contexts. But when we look for other factors like road encroachment, we find that this road encroachment is a factor which is mostly referenced in literature in sub-Saharan African cities, because in developed world cities, most of the cyclists do not experience such kind of condition. That's why this factor is very different from the world cities. Continuing here for the weather condition and environment factor, we find that, well, both urban contexts such as sub-Saharan African cities and developed world cities, they share similarities in the influence added to factors like rain and tree cover. It means that in both contexts, rain influences in reducing or in discouraging cycling use, bicycle use, but also tree cover. Found that most of the studies in both contexts, they found that people prefer to cycle in some greenery or some tree cover. In regard to heat and cold, there are some disagreements. In some studies, they point that, well, heat or cold could influence cycling, but in sub-Saharan African cities, this factor seems to be to have insignificant influence. This could be easily understood because most of our countries, we don't have winter, all the just people are getting it. So this heat and cold has less influence because people experience every summer, every days. When we move for the other factors, such as attitudinal factors, we find that, well, the perception of cycling influenced the reduced travel costs has a similar influence on of context. We found that people in sub-Saharan cities as well as developed world cities, they perceive that cycling could reduce travel costs. However, here are two specific factors such as provision of flexible jobs, such as bicycle taxi, which in developed cities we could not find references mentioning about that. But in sub-Saharan African cities is very popular, especially in small Kisumu, Mzuzu, Malawi. Here, a lot of different stores in developed world cities, they do not include such kind of, and they try to understand the factors influencing cycling, while in sub-Saharan Africa, these factors are becoming very prominent and becoming very important. Another factor in which here also we found to have influence in like in Netherlands, so Belgium, so cycling is people who use to bicycle as stylish people, people seeing them as people that are aware about the environment issue, while in African cities, perception, so we perceive that people who use to bicycle are poor or are people that are broke, that do not have alternative to cycle. So here we found very deep differences. Here we want us to conclude to say that, well, from the vast list of factors influencing cycling, that, well, gender, education level, income, street signage, road encroachment, weather change, travel distance, as the opportunity also to use flexible stage, which have a deep difference between studies that we found in the two urban contexts. However, factors such as street lighting, rain, tree cover present conceptual understandings among researchers in urban context. So this is very important. Understanding is very important. Helps the planners or even the decision maker the time they want to define policies. Try to look for those factors that are very deep differences with the other contexts in order to frame their policies targeted to the audience, targeted to their context, targeted to their reality, rather than trying to impose policies from other contexts. Probably they might not work, might not have a big influence on cycling as suspected. So thank you very much for your time, but also for listening. So still open to receive your comments, also to receive your suggestion. This paper, I want to say again, also is published, it's online, but also now we are trying to reframe this paper and try to look how these factors might affect cycling in different time, let's say in the weather season, in the summer season, in the winter season, and also to see differences between Western as well as Western cities. So thank you very much and also for your attention.
Thank you so much, Classio, for a very interesting presentation. We will follow now first with Sarah and Heba's presentation, and then afterwards we'll have our discussion panel. So please, everybody, if you have any questions regarding Classio, feel free to write it now in the chat and we'll be getting to it in the discussion panel, or you can just raise your hand in the discussion panel and we can hand you the mic to ask your question directly. So now we'll be moving to Sarah Abu Hneidi. Sarah is with us online, but she has recorded her presentation already so it is available also on YouTube. So this is interesting for you if you want to follow it up again. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah, give me a second.
And can you hear it well now? Is the voice clear?
I think you need to increase the volume from YouTube.
Oh, I'm sorry. But overall the voice is working, right?
Well, I don't think it's working. It's not working for me.
It's not working.
Excuse me, was anybody saying anything? Please, can someone confirm with me that the voice is working? Or is it audible in the chat?
It's not working. It's not working at all, Hassan.
Can't you see the video or don't you hear the sound?
We can't see the video. Basically it's muted.
Okay. Tabsora, are you here? Can you join us? And yeah, and unfortunately redo your presentation live again. You have some more commitments to do, but will this be possible to reschedule or if anybody knows, I believe it's a technical issue, but I'm not sure how to make it work.
Yeah, sure. I can go through the presentation. I'm
Okay, thank you.
bringing the slides.
We can also shift the schedule if possible. If Heba is available and you would like to go first, I believe this would be possible if Sarah needs more time.
Yeah, I can go first. My presentation wouldn't take much time, so yeah, I hope that Sarah will be ready by then.
Okay, so please, Heba, share your screen, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so hello everyone, I'm Heba Musa. I'm the founder of Tabdil Center for Cycling Urbanism in Egypt, and that's an advocacy group that works on specifically on cycling mobility, but also the issues that including gender, so the environmental protection and the economy of cycling. And currently, I'm also working in ECLE, Local Governments for Sustainability, in its World Secretariat in Bonn. And ECLE is a network of cities, of 2,500 cities around the world, and we work on different projects. I work in the Sustainable Mobility Department, and my projects also cover active mobility and all the package that comes with it, including gender. So for now, I'll have a small presentation about the gender perspectives in cycling mobility in Africa. Before I start with Africa, I just want to mention that cycling mobility, if we look from the lens of gender, it has a parity in different countries, not only in Africa, because there is a stigma regarding the culture in some countries, and we need to look on the global level, how cycling is always seen as a masculine activity or an activity for men, except for a few exceptions, like the few exceptions where cycling mobility is equally used by men and women, are the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany. And these are the three countries who also happen to have cycling mainstreamed as a mode of mobility and mainstreamed in the infrastructure as well and their policies. So it's really an exceptional situation. If we look at Canada, UK, US, and Ireland, there is a big gap between the numbers of women who cycle and men who cycle. If we look at the statistics in Africa, we any data about the numbers of people cycle and the division between men and women. What we have of the men spent daily in active mobility in Africa, and we can see that in most countries that were mapped by UN Habitat and that data available already, that men spend more time in active mobility in general, not only cycling but walking as well. So in Zambia, for example, and Morocco, the gap is huge between the minutes spent in active mobility. That can indicate that women do shorter trips, or can indicate that women do less trips as well. But we need, of course, in most countries in Africa, that we need more data in urban mobility in general, and specifically cycling mobility is less counted when people look at data. Then another layer of missing data is the gendered perspective in data collection. We can see also that in certain countries, I didn't include it here because it's not about the urban context, but more about the rural context. Women in Niger, for example, spend more time than men in active mobility, just because they spend more time going to trips to sell their products or to fetch water. But because the data was calculated from rural and urban context, and here we focus only on the urban context, then I didn't put it in the graph. Why this gap exists in most countries? I have different factors, and one of the factors that starts from the individuals themselves. Most women are not trained or skilled in cycling from childhood, and not only cycling but sports in general. Men receive, or boys receive, more training in terms of, for example, cycling is one of them, but swimming, running, other at home, other as cycling. also their psychological barriers to cycling, or their perception of safety or risk, and perception of also how they would be welcomed outside the streets for cycling, and their perception of their image. Social environment. With this comes the image of from the whole society as a generally how the people perceive cycling as a female activity or male activity, what are the gender norms in terms of mobility, but also in terms of the division of tasks at home, and how these gender norms affect women's mobility. For example, who drops kids to school, who goes to shopping for grocery stores. What are the tasks for women and what are the tasks for men that are seen as the norm. And another layer is also the myth around cycling and women's bodies. And in certain countries, we hear often certain myths like cycling will cause some certain diseases, or that it will harm women's bodies in different ways. And that also affects the decision of women cycling, but also affects the decision for whole family unit, for example, and the control practice over women, whether they will be allowed to cycle. And the first two layers of cultural environment are not at all related to planning or engineering, but it's related to cultural change. And that's why when advocating for cycling mobility, it's really important to include the cultural factor and not only focus on the technical aspects of it and the engineering and road design. The third layer is the physical environment, and that includes the safety, like in terms of road safety, and access to bikes, for example, whether it's private bikes or bike sharing, and access to cycling facilities if more facilities are needed, for example, let's say showers in certain contexts or shade in certain contexts. And the fourth layer and that influences the cycling on a bigger scale is the urban planning practices and laws and regulations, whether cycling is integral in the urban mobility system or it's totally considered something that is extra or a recreational activity, etc. And I'll zoom in to the case of Egypt because that's the case that I studied the most. And we mapped through Tabdil, we mapped the share of people who cycle, men and women, and we found out that only 1.2% of people who cycle in Egypt are women. And this is a very low rate also compared to other African countries, I assume. Yeah, do you see the next slide?
Yes, there is.
We do.
Yeah, okay. We see it.
Yeah, and then if we look at this data in details, we will find out that there is an intersectional layer for it, and especially the women, the 1% of women who were mapped cycling, they were only in upper income neighborhoods. Gona, for example, that has some women, and Maadi. Gona is a resort town by the Red Sea, which is very touristic and very, I'd say also includes a lot of foreigners. And Maadi is a suburban area in Cairo that is characterized by higher income levels. While other neighborhoods in Cairo and other cities in Egypt scored 0 women cycling. And here I want to stress that it was only cycling for mobility and not recreational cycling in groups, for example, or sports cycling. So we also, in mapping, we paid a bit of attention how people are dressed or their behavior in terms of cycling mobility, and also the type of bicycle that they used. And if we look more in the cycling society in Egypt, we will know that it's divided in two groups. One of them, it's called the lifestyler cyclists, and are people who are cycling for fun or for recreational, or athletes, for example, or people who cycle because they have certain awareness of environmental factors or health benefits. And there are people who are cycling for a long time for economic reasons, for example, or they use a bicycle for delivery, or they are vendors. And normally the old schoolers are only men, and in the lifestyler groups we see more women who use cycling mostly for recreational purpose, but this as a start gives them some confidence in the streets, and some of them later will use a bicycle as a mode of mobility, but it's a slow change and it takes a lot of time. This movement started in Egypt in around 2006, the first mapping of it. So it takes for more than roughly 17 years, and we're seeing still with this long time, the change is only 1%. And we have in Egypt a lot of activist groups who focus on increasing the visibility of women who cycle, because one of the issues in cycling for women is the level of harassment and level of violence they face in the streets. And when the image is broken, like that there are women cycling in this city or in this neighborhood, it can, like the first wave of women cycling, they take a load of harassment and they face a lot of challenges. But then in the same neighborhood, that when the image is changed and when more women are cycling in the future, they face less harassment. And we see this, for example, in neighborhoods like downtown Cairo or Maadi, because it's more used to seeing women cycling. However, in, let's say, informal settlements, this image is not present yet. And the group that I am highlighting here, it's called Cairo Cycling. Something very interesting, they view charity goods in informal settlements and villages. This activity, they comes from higher income neighborhoods where they elect the charities, and they take it to distribute it in lower income neighborhoods. And through their trips, they cross a lot of different, diverse neighborhoods, and that allows them to enforce this image in different contexts, and not only in the neighborhoods where they live actually, or where they know they will be accepted. And another success story that was more not on the soft interventions, but rather on the infrastructure level. The bike sharing system that was opened in Fayoum city in Egypt, it's an urban area, however it's surrounded by a rural area, and it's a more conservative city where cycling for women didn't exist. The bike sharing system was distributed in a way that connects the university to the university dorms, but they added more stations around the women's dorms. And with these stations, more female students took the bicycles to the university, and more female students started using the bicycles to train themselves on cycling. So after the pilot phase ended, there were actually more women men and totally the city started seeing a new image of female bike users, and hopefully soon that would be normal. So